Hello guys, welcome to Tech Keys X. Today we are on episode number 4 of PowerShell. We're going to cover the following topics. All the timestamps are in the description below. I hope you enjoyed today's episode and make sure you like and subscribe. So let's look at the get member commandlet. This commandlet is the procedure in the pipeline. So we're using one pipeline here to path into the where object and then to the pipeline here to get member. So what do they actually do? So get member basically will give you all the properties and methods that are available from the previous object. So here we're getting the file system object. So here it will contain all the files and folders. Then here we're passing it to the where object. The where object in turn holds the individual files and folders, and they'll have properties and methods. So if I run this here, so you can see what I mean. When the output appears, we get all the methods, all the properties, such as last access time here, last write time, because these are the properties a file can have. And notice that you can some of them, get them, and also set them because you can modify them. But for example, the length of the file, you can only read, so you can't really change the length of the file without actually detaining its content. So here, that's what the get member does. So I've only run it up to here, and that's what you get. But if you then add a parameter called member type and then start typing it, you get all the different options. So if you only wanted to see the methods that are available, you can just do that, add member type and then add methods. So if I run this here, so you can see now we get all the methods such as open, open read, open text, refresh, replace. So these are the members which are methods. So you can also do that with properties. But notice here, when I'm passing the file system object to a select object, I'm only getting one property, which is name. So what do you think will happen to get member? Will it print all the properties that a file should have? So in this instance, let's have a look. If I run this here, only returns one property called name. This is because PowerShell modifies the previous object. So here we got all the properties, but then we limited it to this property only. And that's why the get member only sees one property being passed along the pipeline. So this is important to understand. When you limit the properties, get member will only see the properties from the final pipeline. You can also use get member for COM object. So we know scripting.filesystem object has several methods, but what are they? So you can actually find out that by running this, and notice the get member is taking in the object from the previous step here. So if we have a look, you can see all the methods that are available on this object. And if there are any properties, there is one property called drives, and it only has the get method. So then you can use that to find out about drives. Just remember, get member is really useful to find out properties and methods, and then you can limit it to only bring back properties or only bring back methods. Understand that when you limit the objects to certain properties, get member will then only see those properties that are passed down the pipeline. In PowerShell, you can use the where function, which is available on arrays and collections, just like you do in C#. We can then pass it a script block. Think of it like an anonymous function or a delegate, where it automatically receives the $_ variable, which is the current item in the array or collection. And then you can do filters on its properties like the name of the file. And then you can specify criteria. So I'm looking for any file that contain the word auto, and then I'm just printing the name of that file. So if I run this code here, that I've got the output with all the files that contain the word auto. I am using $_, and this $_ is the variable name. An alternative syntax is you can use ds item. So you can do name here, and you can see that when I run this, we get the same output. So $PS item is basically $_. It's just a shortened version of it. So if you see $PS item or $_, that basically refers to the current item. And notice the where is only available on collections and arrays. So if you have a look at the object, my object here, and if I run this, you can see that it's of array type. The reason it's array type is get child item returns multiple files and folders. And when you do get type on this variable here, this will be of type array because it contains other items within it. And when you do the where, it will process those individual items and then filter them. So that's why the where works. And then it takes in a script block. So this is in curly braces here, is known as a script block. And think of it like an anonymous function in C#, where it automatically receives this variable here, and you're just filtering it on this condition, and where this returns true. So this function returns true. The where will basically do the filtering on that and then output it to the next pipeline, which will simply do a select on it and select the name of the file. You can, using select update, you can access any properties that you want. Only returning key s is container. So this is another property that's available, and that's basically a true or a false property. So we don't need to specify any conditions on it. So here you can just query it like this, and you can see we got the output, but for anything that is a folder. So notice here that I have now changed this to equal false. So PowerShell doesn't have the equal symbol like this. So instead you use this parameter EQ and then supply it $false. The reason $false is because you can't do this in PowerShell. It says it's invalid in order to get true and false. So you basically have to add the $. Think of it as like a keyword in PowerShell. And then we're just checking if it's equal to false, and that is our condition. Whereas previously, because its container already returns true and false where in PowerShell, that it's only available for array date types, and then you can process the individual items like this, or like this, or like this. PowerShell allows you to create something called a script block. A script block, as shown here, is basically a function that doesn't have a name, but what you do is store that function in a variable. So in other languages such as C#, anonymous function. So this is what script block looks like, and as you can see here, you define it within the curly braces here, and then you can invoke that function because it's stored in a variable. You can invoke it with the AND operator here to execute. So if I run this here, so I've highlighted it, I'm gonna run this here. We got the output to say hello PowerShell, but you can create more complex functions or script blocks like this. So here we have a math operation, and we're gonna use the param keyword here. This will allow you to pass two parameters, A and B, and those A and B parameters then can be used within the function here. So we're gonna add them together, and then the way you invoke it is using the AND operator here to execute, and then the variable name, and then the two parameters you had. So if I run this here, we've got the output 10, and then I'm changing the two parameters. So here you can see it is now 20. Let's say you want it to always be -7 days. So rather than keep having to do this get date, -7 days, what you can do is you can store that in a variable and other people can use it, or you can use it elsewhere in your code. So here, just to show you, so this is the output we get. So 28th of March -7 days from today's date. So here you can see that we can now use that variable to get the date in this variable. So that's where the function is over here, and we are then executing that function and storing its output in this variable. If I run this here, and you can see the output is now stored in there. So then you can use that variable that you just created here to get all the files which were modified in the last 7 days. So you can see how this can be really useful. So if I open this here, and you can see we've got all the files that are modified less than 7 days ago. So here, this is really good because you are not having to define what -7 day is every time. You just define it once. So just like you would with a function. But this is a script block. So it's like an anonymous function that's just being stored in a variable. Script blocks are used in PowerShell a lot. So you should be familiar with what they do and how they work. So they have their own purpose versus functions within PowerShell. Yeah, just remember, define your script blocks in these curly braces here. And you can pass parameters using the param keyword, and then in open parentheses, close parentheses, you would define the two variables that you want to be treated as arguments into the function. And then you can invoke that with this and have in your two arguments here. In PowerShell, this is how you can declare a function. So you use the keyword function and then name your function, and then within here, curly braces here, you supply the parameters that you want to pass. So here we're passing two variables, X and Y. These would be the parameters, and those X and Y are added together. This Z is an internal variable to this function, and then we just return the output of Z. Now we could have shortened this code by putting X and plus Y here in the return statement, but instead I decided to add a middle step here just to explain that a function can have a body like this, so it can be expanded on multiple lines. So you don't have to do everything in the return line. So here, if I run this now, you can see 10 plus 20, and you got the output 30 here. And here, again, this one, if we run this, we're just applying it different arguments here. 5 plus 20, those get added here and then returned by the Z. There is another way to do this. This is the functional syntax. Third, what you can do is you can use the script block syntax. So here, the difference is we're no longer using the function keyword. Instead, we're using a variable declared add numbers, and this variable actually will hold the body of the script block or the function that you want to execute. So notice the function has no name, so it might be referred to as an anonymous function. So this anonymous function is basically assigned to this variable. Notice the syntax here. It pretty much matches the function syntax here. Parameter names X and Y, and then we've got the body here, Z variable declared, and then we've got the return statement, and that it basically returns Z. So notice how they are very similar in syntax between a function and between a script block. So whichever you use, you're pretty much going to get the same functionality. So here, in order to execute this, notice we use just the function name and passed it two arguments. So with a script block, you actually use the call operator here, which executes or invokes the function. So here, the function is actually stored in a variable, and this symbol here, the ampersand, will actually call function with these two arguments. If I run this here, and you can see we got the output of 7. So this is the way you do functions, either using the function keyword and your function name and the body of the function, or you can do a script block, which is essentially an anonymous function that is basically assigned to a variable, and then you use the call operator here to execute that function via the variable. So two different methods of doing it. Both of them should be familiar to you because in PowerShell, sometimes script blocks are used, in other places, functions are used. So I hope this clarifies the difference between syntax of a function versus a script block here. In PowerShell, you can invoke a function by passing it as an argument to another function. So here, I have a function called add numbers. This function is not called directly. Instead, it is being called from this invoke function. So this function here will actually take in this parameter, which is a function name, and another parameter A and another parameter B. In turn, that will use the call operator and call the function name passed into here. So here you can see when we call the invoke function, we are passing it an argument function name, which is called add numbers. So that's the function name there. And notice we are passing it parameter A, parameter B, and then these arguments here, 10 and 5, get passed into the function over here because they get transferred from here into here. And the call operator here actually calls the function. If I run this code here and if I run this line, you can see we get this variable storing the result. And if I print out the result, you can see we get 15. So here we have invoked a function. We have passed it a function name called add numbers. We pass it the two parameters A expects, and notice how the parameters are named to this function here using dash and the parameter name. But you can invoke that function like this as well. So invoke function, you don't have to name your parameters. You can just asset the function name, the first parameter, the second parameter. So if I run this here, and now you can see we get the same output as before, but naming parameters and passing them into a function is much better. So this is a bit like a delegate in other languages such as C#, where you are passing the function as a parameter into another function who then calls the relevant function. So I hope this makes sense. So this is useful in certain situations where you want to customize the function that actually gets executed based on some other logic that you may have in your code. Let's explain a high order function in PowerShell. So here, high order function basically means that a function that calls another function. So let's have a look at an example. So we have a function here called new multiplier. This takes in a parameter or factor that is of integer data type. So here, what this function will return is actually a script block. A script block is basically like an anonymous function. So anonymous function in C#, it doesn't have a name. So in this instance, this script block that we're creating, notice this is the data type. This is now code being passed as data because you're passing a function as a parameter to another function. So here we've got create word. Basically, we are creating a type of this object, which is a script block. Notice that it's a type. This is what will actually be contained within this function. So we're specifying that it's going to take a parameter. Notice the similarity here. And if you don't know about script blocks, watch one of my other videos where I talk in detail around script blocks and how they compare against functions. So you can see it's pretty much the same. It takes in a parameter of X. This $sign is just to refer to the variable name. But notice I have used the backtick here to escape the $sign because $sign here would actually be evaluated if you don't use the backtick. So we're just kind of putting it in what you might say single quote characters. So we just wanted to treat it as a string currently. So here, that's what we're doing. And it's going to then multiply that X by this factor coming from here. So here, when we say double, this is a variable, and this variable will actually call the function here. So it's going to call the new multiplier function with a multiplier of 2. So this variable will actually now hold this here. So it would basically say param X by X and multiplied by the factor, which is 2 in this instance. So this function is being called here. And then once it's called, it will return this over here, which in turn will get stored here. And then we are calling function with the call operator, which is the ampersand here. And we're passing it an argument of 5. This argument, remember, is the parameter here. So we're just passing this 5 into this X here. Now we already passed the factor because we passed the factor here. So the factor is already defined and it's number 2 in this instance because we passed 2. So what this variable is actually now holding is the script block or anonymous function here, which will then get multiplied and show the output. So if I run this here, so you can see when we say 5 multiplied by factor 2, which is doubling it, you get 10. If you triple it, then you get 15. So why would you even do this? So this is useful where you don't have to define every time what doubling means. You can actually just use the function to do that, but it's using the same original function here. If you need to change anything, you want to change it in one place. So this is very useful to make your code manageable, and it's not that hard to understand once you understand how the parameters are being worked. If this function is being called, it just basically returned another function which is being stored here, which in the final output we're just calling that script block anonymous function here, and we're just passing it a parameter here. Notice we only need to pass in one parameter because this param here only takes in one parameter. So I hope this makes sense on the high order function. If you don't understand anything, comment below and I will explain it further to you. But yeah, I hope you do enjoy using high order functions to make your code much more manageable and efficient.